and welcome to On the Road to DevHops. You guys know the drill. My buddy and I, Bryan Finster, well, we belly up to the bar every once in a while, and sometimes we bring somebody along with us that can, well, be the punching bag in the middle or the referee, depending on where the conversation goes. So you guys know I'm an architect, I'm an engineer. Bryan, why don't you introduce yourself and our guest?
I write code. This is Michelle Brush. Sorry, I met her when we were both speaking at QCon, and we bonded over a topic that caused us that we both facepalm over all the time. That we're gonna have a good time talking about this evening.
Well, Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I'm Michelle Brush, and I worry about how things fail for a living. So.
Oh, that sounds stressful. And that's why I'm going to ask you the next most important question of the evening is, we're bellying up to the virtual bar. Do you have anything to drink with you?
I don't right now. Unfortunately, it's a little early in the day for me, but hey, I will definitely drink later in solidarity.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. You realize that. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. You could have had a mimosa. They're 24/7. Yeah. All right, Bryan, how about you?
It's not early in the day for me because I'm in a further east time zone, but I'm drinking some Knob Creek 9-year bourbon.
He's snobby about this kind of stuff. He really is. I had to go slumming for something to put because I didn't go and buy my new favorite, which is this grapefruit and rose water vodka. It is crazy good. I'm just learning to drink grown-up drinks, by the way. So instead, I've got some seltzer and a little bit of vanilla vodka, like a teeny tiny bit, because I'm going from what I call dry to July to almost dry August. So I'm trying to transition back into drinking way too much. Not true, but true. So I didn't get to go to QCon. I wasn't walking down the street with you. But something tells me this was a pretty awesome conversation. Well, what is it? Tell me a little bit about it. Let's get into it.
You go, Michelle. Now you introduce the topic, please.
All right. Well, the conversation was around how folks, when they have an outage or they're out of SLO, they decide that the best thing they can do at that point in time is freeze production. Whether that's because they want to buy back reliability in their SLO by waiting it out, or it's because they think they need to like pause and regroup and, figure out what went wrong. But this idea that you're somehow going to gain reliability through freezing is what we were talking about.
Well, it
would be filing the correction of errors. This is my past, not my present. It'd be filing the correction of errors, making sure that you spent the next month or so getting a VP signature to make sure that you don't break things again. Things like that, just to ensure quality.
Well, and on top of all that, when you start to freeze like that, it's as though you have a puppy that made a mistake on the carpet. It's one thing to bring it over and like get its nose close to it, and you're like, you shouldn't do this, and they cower a little bit and they're good.
No more peeing.
Right. But if you actually like lock them in the garage for a month, right, you mentally damage them. I think about this when we take these teams and we say, you can't go to production anymore. We are actually dramatically demoralizing. I mean, my experience watching this happen, because I will not do this to people. That's the experience. When I see that happen, people hang their heads. It's like, let me rebound. Let's get into this. Let's fix this quickly. Fail fast, fail small, fix quick. Cheapers, creepers. So have you had anything like this happen recently?
I think it's a natural tendency all the time for companies and folks to do this. I've experienced it several times in my career. And I think, it's funny. I like that you brought up a puppy and trying to, teach a puppy not to do something. It's like sometimes we sort of correlate learning with pain for some reason. And I never understand why we keep doing that over and over again. I don't feel like people actually learn in stressful situations or high emotional situations. But I do think there's an element of part of what we want to do this is almost like to create a punishment mechanism or a consequence for the bad activity. And then the other reason I think it keeps happening is when folks feel out of control, they need to take control somehow. And one of the few technical switches they might have is, turning off the deployment pipeline.
That kind of reminds me, this is very tangential, but see if you see the parallel to it. When a child is small and they get close to the stove and you tell them no, you're very stern with them, you tell them no, and you don't want them to get hurt. There does come a point where they get it wrong again. They get too close and the parent smacks their hand and they do pull back and they may cry, but they may never do it again. I have a hard time with that, but it seems like there's a little bit of that here. Is there ever a time where you say, okay, whoa, back, we're gonna pause for 24 hours or 48 hours? Is there a reasonable pause to allow everybody to keep their wits about them?
No, and I'll tell you why. Is because they don't pause. What they say is you can't deploy, but they don't change anything else, right? They may go and do a postmortem, or worst case, a root cause analysis, or in my case, a correction of errors, which they rebranded to commitment of excellence, because that sounds better apparently. But they do that, but we still have these deadlines we have to meet. So coding doesn't stop, right? And what's the main thing that we're always talking about if you want high quality is drive down batch size. So what do? We know you can't deploy, but we're going to keep driving up the batch size. And then we're going to say, but you're doing it harder and better, so it's not going to break.
We're actually, when that happens, we are completely disregarding all of the behaviors that we've been working so hard across the entire enterprise, the whole way up to leadership. Everybody's been on board. One stutter step and the door slams down.
Oh, it's worse. I'm sorry, Michelle. I know that you want to jump in, but it's worse because the naysayers in the enterprise say, see, when the next deploy happens and breaks again, see, that modern stuff doesn't work. So what's your thoughts, Michelle?
Well, and the thing that depresses me about it is, there's always the hangover from the freeze, to your point around like that large batch size goes out to production in a way that it wasn't tested all at once, all this complexity, possible to detect which change broke everything, and time to mitigate just draws out. And weirdly, I've never been in the situation where folks take the step and actually correlate that outage that happens inevitably after the freeze period with the freeze itself. It's like the freeze is sacred. And they go back to like that outage again was caused because we moved too fast, or we did something wrong, or we didn't have enough review, right?
Well, and it seems to get tagged back to the original incident, right? I'm just going to use that term. There's an original incident, whatever it was. Now that they have paused everything, they've caused this massive batch size. We're no longer using our excellence to move forward. When something else happens, they're back at the first thing. They're back at, see, look at all this. Look at none of this works. See, none of this works. How you guys need to test more. We need to hire a testing team. We really need, I'm going to stand up an independent testing organization. They're going to be my SQA team. And when you're all done with it, they get it for 2 weeks.
Now, it's funny, but when, and you've heard me tell this story several times about how we learned to do continuous delivery the first time. And, I was now on a team, as the tech lead on a team where we were deploying to production multiple times a day. And another team who had not been focusing on their quality process the way we had broke something. And management shut down all teams from delivering anything, even though we didn't have to deliver. We didn't have to chain everybody together. Every team was independent at this point, or all the teams that we'd re-architected. And I'm sitting here just mentally visualizing the batch size, the risk piling up behind that production deploy button, because we're doing real CD, trunk-based development, and it's like we don't. And I finally, just in panic after like day 5, went to my manager. I said, you have to let us release. I've got 15 developers pushing code using continuous integration, piling up change on top of change with no production feedback. This is terrifying. Do you not understand?
There's an infographic for this, Bryan. There's an infographic here somewhere, or a meme. We need somebody who's talented at drawing. Oh, maybe we'll go out and use one of those AIs. I'll use Dolly tonight and see if I can generate this. We literally need the developers, and as though it's water flowing into the dam, and the dam, right, is the water's rising, rising, rising. It's spilling up over the end, and the dam's going to break. And when it breaks, it's going to be bad. Like, that's your story to me, is that.
Yeah.
Before, it was a nice trickle. There was a little spillway. It was gentle down through the valley, past all the houses. Not now. Not now.
But Michelle, I have a question for you. So
Yeah.
I've spent most of my career working, the last 7 years has been platform. Before that, it's all supply chain. If you work in supply chain, you're really tightly aligned to retail in a lot of cases. I spent many years working at Walmart. And Amazon also has a change freeze, I'm told. I've talked to ex-Amazonians, and they say that, Amazon has a change freeze like a day before Black Friday and, a couple days around Christmas. That's right. Walmart has a change freeze for the holidays. It starts in mid-September and lasts until mid-January, where you have to have VP approval to get anything in. Have you ever experienced that sort of environment? And what outcomes did you had?
So I've actually experienced that multiple times. When I worked in healthcare software, a lot of it was around, there's HIMSS, which is a big healthcare conference. And so it was like, please don't break anything during HIMSS, so we're going to freeze. And then, interestingly enough, is that when you're working with healthcare customers, they're each kind of their own enterprise, each hospital system is, and they would want customer specific freeze dates as well. So they would come to us and they would say, okay, we need you to freeze on this because this is our financial reporting time, or something like that. And so we ended up in this weird situation where we're not just managing our own freezes, but also our customers' expectations around their events. And then you get this like really complex deployment schedule of when you can and can't deploy. And so I think it happens anytime you're dealing with any enterprise customers. You're gonna, or large organizations with retail is a great example. This is gonna come up. And what I found, unfortunately, is that leading into the freeze, you get a lot of folks sort of rushing to get their feature out.
Cramming those changes.
Quick, we got to get it done. Quick. No, don't put as much testing out there. Stop coding them. Get it out the door. Yeah. And then, as the date gets closer and closer, they start asking for more exceptions to the normal process. They start asking for, they start taking shortcuts. And so you have this period of instability just before the freeze. And then, mostly things are quiet during the freeze. Not always, because, software's not the only thing that changes in a system, right? Right. Exactly.
You got hardware failures, you've got customer behavior changing, like all that stuff. So maybe you get a little lucky and you get that quiet period you were hoping for, and then you do the big change push at the end with that huge batch size. So,
I was talking to Courtney Kistler, and I don't know if you know Courtney, but she's done. She led a team who figured out this whole continuous delivery DevOps thing at Nordstrom e-commerce and reached nirvana, because Nordstrom has change freeze, but she and her team demonstrated that their quality process was so high that what they were doing with continuous delivery was such a high quality that they had a waiver from change freeze. I mean, so they could release during the holidays because they just focused on the fundamentals.
But she was able to get the right audience that she could demonstrate that, right? It wasn't as though it was.
So she had enough clout.
Right. She had some clout. It helps to be the VP. My husband is ops to my dev, and he used to be a hospital administrator in the computer departments there, in the technology departments. And so he went through exactly what you're talking about, these billing cycles, all of these driven. So your freeze cycles were based on different types of runs, monthly runs that would happen, weekly runs, what time of day, the different kind of processing would happen. Very, very brittle, because you darsn't, that's my central Pennsylvania word, you darsn't interrupt that. You should not, you can't interrupt that. There can be no peace there. Myself, I do a lot with the government, and I can tell you over the last couple of decades, the amount of freezes that happen, some of them are around time of year processing, like the IRS, and they don't stop everything for all of the IRS because there's so many different systems. but those that are right around the filing of the taxes, they stop in November, and they are frozen not until April 15th, but they are frozen until the spring. To your point, everything else around it continues to go forward. I can understand where that came from, though, because people are afraid that something's going to break, and they saw it break because we were waterfall and things broke. But now that we're doing it differently, people still have that natural inclination that if we don't change anything, it won't, we won't break it. We are not building it that way.
There's a analogy I use. I'm not sure how well it lands because I'm a motorcycle rider. And I don't ride slow. I ride a BMW GS Adventure. It has a lot of ground clearance. It corners really well. And on a motorcycle, if you come into a corner too fast and you hit the brakes, the bike stops turning and you run off the cliff. I live in Arkansas. You'll run off the cliff and die. If you come into a corner too fast on a motorcycle, the right thing to do is turn harder, do it more, right? Lean in and just go around the corner and try not to bring so much energy into the next corner. And it's very similar here. How do we fix this? Because we have this, it's because what I'm trying to get to is it's the habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Car habits while riding a motorcycle. And we have to be able to fix it, but we have this conflict, right? It's like, okay, we know that we have a quality problem, so we have to shut everything down, except we also know that smaller batches improve quality and larger batches reduce quality. How do we solve this dilemma?
But we don't know that. And what I mean by that is we know that.
Yeah.
But we need to be able to put qualitative and quantitative values behind it so people see it, because they believe.
It's simple. If I have a haystack that consists of one piece of straw, very hard to hide a needle. Okay, so it's there you go, math.
And my point is, we have to convince them of those things, right? You have to be, just saying that isn't enough, right? We have I am finding that people believe the data, whatever the data is, people believe the data. So if we can provide evidence and they can observe the evidence and make their own judgments, generally, knock on wood, generally people become believers, but the behavior is hard to change. It really is hard to change.
I have heard a leader once say that, prove to me you can mitigate in 10 minutes or less, the vast majority of your outages or incidents, and I'll let you release faster. And I thought that was like an interesting trait, right? Like it,
I have a question.
to your point.
Don't you have to have a lot of outages to prove that?
Well, that's where you start like putting the Easter egg in on your, hey, I've got that. I'm just gonna put out this feature flag.
I mean, that seems like a catch-22.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on, I guess, the size of your organization and the rest of the maturity around it. But it was an interesting argument around, like, back to there's a piece of data they're asking for to show it. And I do believe that, like you said, the haystack and the piece of hay in it, that like it is a clear correlation between smaller batch sizes and time to mitigate. Because like I just get to roll back that one release and then I know whether it was that or not. And so it was an interesting proposal. But I do believe that metrics should always come with stories, because stories are what actually resonate more than the data.
And you only need metrics that matter. You should only be a small set of them. I continually am in this situation where people want these indexes and can you give us the list of all the different metrics that we need? Like, no. What direction are we going? North? Okay, so I'm going to give you a metric that says whether or not we're going north or some other direction. Is that good?
Here's the problem. So I actually had a sales call today where I was evaluating a delivery metric solution for company I work for, and this is something I'm relatively knowledgeable about, so she couldn't really trip me up. But she's like, well, so what problem are you trying to solve? I'm like, well, I mean, I'm not really trying to solve a problem. It's just that we're blind right now. You know, I said, as an organization, we are, I would say, above average as far as development goes, but we can always be better. And as we continue to grow, inefficiencies cost money. I said, nothing's broken. Because she's asking me, well, what's broken? What are you trying to find? Nothing's broken. But do you like add a dashboard to a car after things break? Or would you like to know before? And she said, and she laughed and she said, well, you know, honestly, most people are trying to bolt on metrics after things already gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, yeah, that's true. And so this is the problem with, I would just bring the data. Well, you haven't instrumented the goddamn data. You're waiting for a problem to say, well, you haven't shown me how there's a solution. Well, you haven't invested in the ability for me to demonstrate that.
Oh, the chicken and the egg.
But I think you know, Bryan said earlier, and it was a key point around, like, everyone's still coding and everyone's still working on stuff. And so there is this challenge of, you have this issue, you do need to address it. So what do you do that isn't just let all these people just keep doing what they're doing right now?
Right.
And I believe that you have folks, some percentage of the organization pivot and start focusing on quality. And that can be, you know, actually getting release velocity to a good state. That can be, you know, going through the backlog. That could be working on getting some better observability, you know, toolings for generic mitigations. But rather than freezing, I would much rather the organization, you know, fix it, I guess, at the faucet and pivot what people are working on.
I wrote a blog post, and if you ever read my blog, it's pretty snarky. But I wrote a blog
who'd have thought?
Yeah. 5-Minute DevOps Holiday Edition. And this was my celebration, and this after I left retail, a celebration of yet another change freeze. And the suggestion I had was like, look, you know, here's the problem you're causing. So what you should do is either give all of the developers a paid vacation for the duration or focus on improvement activities and stop pushing features. Just stop.
Yeah.
You can't deliver them anyway. And all you're doing is piling, you know, problem on top of problem without knowing it, because you terminated the feedback loops. You know, and so I agree that if sure, you know, we have a problem. We're not going to solve the problem by just going faster without changing anything. We need to go and identify where the problems are, but then we need to pivot to fixing the damn problem instead of just, oh, but we have a date. No, we don't have a date because you just put in a change freeze. And you getting a VP signature doesn't make it less risky.
Okay, the entire
It makes
process
it more
of
risky because I can't get signatures as frequently as I need to deliver.
the entire thing that we're talking about, you know, coming back to the humans in this, coming back to the dev teams, coming back to those who are essentially getting punished, the morale goes down, the desire to slow down and then speed up and slow down and speed up. It's actually a reason that people will start to change organizations. If you are consistently punishing me and not enabling me, imagine if you applied this to sports.
So there was a manager that we were working very closely with in platform who was deeply a deep believer in the power of CD. We were using him as one of the pilot teams to flesh out new features, and they had optimized their process tremendously. Their quality level was super high. They had like minor defects, no incidents at all for months. They had one incident got thrown on what was called ICE, which is you have to have VP approval to make any change, because it was just, oh no, you had a major incident. Well, what about the ratio? You know, can we look at the ratio of incidents? And it just destroyed his morale, his team's morale. You know, it just made them feel like crap. They were so angry. And, you know, software is not built by computers.
Not yet.
Not yet. You know, quality comes from passionate people who believe in delivering quality. And if you suck their passion away, then you're just hurting the business.
And they see it as being punished. They understand it for what it is. They understand that people are scared, but at the same time, you internalize it. as punishment. And then there comes resent, or you disengage. Got to tell you, you want defects to sneak in. Do that when you have people who aren't paying attention, who are not passionate, and who are disengaged. I don't mean you have to be crazy busy all the time. I mean, you're paying attention to what you're doing. You're engaged in what you're doing. When you disengage, you're not, it's like not paying attention as you're driving, right?
You know what? You know, the best time to implement the Superman hack as a bad actor, and for the viewers out there who may be too young and don't remember Superman 4, where Richard Pryor figured out how to, well, this is also done in Office Space, steal money cents at a time and inject it into malicious code into their systems. That's the change freeze is the best time to do that. So compliance people, you should really look at change freeze as risk.
Wait, so if you can't appeal to their sense of morale, and if you can't appeal to their sense of quality, what you're going to do is scare them with the potential that they'll have all of this money.
Use all the weapons.
Stolen. Okay, all right. So you wait a minute. You're gonna scare them, and you're going to wait. It seems as though you're trying to use the same kind of stick tool that they're using on the developers.
I'm just providing information. Do with it what you will.
Oh, just providing information.
I'm not going to punish anybody. I'm just saying this is real.
Also, let's turn this on its edge. So we all agree that this happens. We have collectively all experienced this. Whatever it is, big or small, an incident happens and there's a knee-jerk reaction to freeze. The scope of the freeze could be small. Sometimes the scope of the freeze is the whole damn enterprise. How do we move the needle? How do we help in those situations when there's about to be a freeze? How can we run interference? Can we, as leaders in these technical issues, can we run interference and say, whoa, don't freeze. Here's what we're going to do. Is there a way to mitigate this? Michelle, from your world, how would you get after this?
So one thing I've seen be successful is to create it as like a phase. Yeah, and it sounds so silly because they're saying I don't want it to happen at all. Like I don't want the freeze to happen at all. But if you can convince folks that this sudden shut off and this sudden turn on is risky to the business, which it is, then you can sometimes get them to understand that maybe like we need a graceful entry into a colder period, not quite frozen, and then kind of preempt the freeze by saying, okay, and in that time, we're going to do what we just talked about, which is we're going to pivot some folks to doing some fixes. We're going to focus on, what we learned from the postmortem. We're going to, harden our, qualification through testing, not through hiring a whole org. and then you kind of show that like, hey, things didn't run off the rails. We didn't have 6 consecutive outages after this.
Right.
And I think that's helpful because right now there's confirmation bias because the leadership gets to tell them every time we didn't have an outage during the freeze, it was because we froze. And if we can
it's hard to break things if you don't change anything.
Yeah, but things still change. But
they do, even if they're not changed by us via code.
Yeah. And so the idea being that, okay, we can show that there's another way, but still not completely take away the tool they really wanted, which was the freeze.
Well, I like in my mind, we start to have like this little mantra that it's freeze then thaw, right? It's freeze then thaw from there. But it's when I think about physical systems, there are times where there's a shut off. They throw the shut off. And when they bring things back online, they don't just throw the whole switch. They fire up the first thing, they watch it. Okay, we're good. Fire up the next. It's good. Fire up the next. And they do that kind of gradual. Huh?
It's not been my experience. It's like is over. Boom.
But I'm not talking about software. I'm talking about physical systems. You're talking about electricity, when you're talking about water, when you're talking about other cyber physical systems. When you bring something back online, you generally don't shut it off and then turn it all back on. I'm just saying that there's oftentimes a graduated revamping, a graduated coming back up onto to Michelle's point of kind of walking out of the freeze by thawing a piece at a time.
Michelle said something that there was an aha moment for me as well, which was a gradual slide into the freeze, which means basically we're replacing the to-do work with, improvement work and completing WIP.
Imagine that.
Instead of parking WIP and then just hoping it doesn't blow up when we try to remember where we were at the end of the freeze, right?
Well, but
and so I think that's super important. But there's something else I want to talk. Okay, you go ahead, Tracy.
no. I'm trying to remember. We'll come back to it. Keep going.
Okay, but there's something else. It's you can't just freeze things and say you guys go figure out what you did. Make it better. You have to have a real postmortem process, and it has to be an honest postmortem. It has to be focused on the system that's broken and not the people, right? And so a friend of mine, they had an incident recently, and a couple of years ago, write it down. A couple of years ago, they'd had a couple of major incidents in that organization, and to correct that, the CTO reinstituted CAB, and the minimum time to get to production is 2 days, up to 5 or 10, depending on how many levels of CAB you need to go through based on how risky they think the change is. And they had an incident recently, and he was tasked with doing a root cause analysis, not a postmortem. But he's trained correctly. He knows what it should be. And so he was doing a postmortem. And during his investigation, discovered that the fix that would have prevented the incident was ready to deploy, but it was stuck in CAB. It had 48 more hours to go. And he was advised against including that detail in the postmortem for political reasons, because the CTO said we have to have a CAB, so the CAB's correct. And my response was the postmortem is either truthful or it's a lie, right? And that postmortem was a lie, because all it did was try to focus on things over here that aren't the responsibility of the CTO, because the CTO broke the system.
I'm gonna come back. So I'm gonna two different things. I had to write about that. I want to come back to this idea that you mentioned that the postmortem needed to be focused on the defect or the incident itself.
It should be focused on the system we use.
Hold on. Where I'm going with that is that we do need to understand people, process, the technology. So we can't just say it was this tech thing only, because oftentimes it is. But hold on, I just want to finish. It's the surrounds around it.
I didn't say. Okay.
Well, no, you did. You said not the people. We need to focus on the problem and not the people. I just wanted to kind of course correct you. Oh, you want me to rewind it and find it?
That's why
you did say that. You did say that. Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. Oh, wait. System, not the problem. I said the system. And the system includes how that problem was created, right? How was this problem created? That's the system that you need to focus on. What's the timeline? Was the timeline of events? Where can we find what process we're using that most likely created this defect? How can we detect this defect in the future to prevent it from happening again? Not Bob broke it.
Well, so we're gonna have a lot of fun with this, because I'm gonna have the sound engineer come back and find that segment where he misspoke it, and we're gonna repeat it again and again and again and again just to prove my point. Michelle.
Well, I was actually So I think when you say something like what Bryan said was like not about the people, but I think when people say that, what they're trying to convey is not about human error. Like, don't focus on the human error. Focus on. You have to talk about the people. You're right. You have to talk about the people, but you have to talk about them in the context of the system, convince them this was the right thing to do.
Exactly. And that's all I was trying to get us at, is that if anybody was listening and they're having fun and they might not be as close to this, if they heard that, they might think, I just need to focus on the technology. The process over here is broken, and there's this other people aspect that we need to deal with, or roles or responsibilities are not well defined. We do have to look at the whole enchilada, but we are not trying to blame anybody. If somebody made a human error, okay, then we have to understand, was there anything that we could have done to have helped in that instance? Why did that make its way through?
Yeah, and to be clear, there's human activity in a postmortem. If there's a postmortem, you're doing it incorrectly.
I want to come back to something else that you both hit on. I think Michelle probably is going to have a lot of insight on this based on the, kind of your journey. We were talking about stopping features. We've been dealing with features, and there's a problem, so we're going to stop that. We're going to turn everybody over here, and we're going to have them start working on defects and quality. And I actually think that there's something that's in between that. If we had gotten to the point where we were hyper focused on features and we were not adding to that the continual attention to paying down debt and the other improvements, well, we also have an imbalance going on. So it could be a bad behavior that has something positive happen because we're going to start to pay down some of the tech debt. Now, we shouldn't have gotten that far anyways, right? So imbalance between it. But I can see, I've been in situations where people are pushing features, and there is known tech debt that's not getting addressed. It's just sitting over there, and it's not causing problems right now. At least we don't think. Like, have you?
The problem, yeah. So the challenge I've always run into with tech debt as a concept is I love it as an analogy. It's a great metaphor, helps us understand these decisions we're making, and it kind of creates this way of communicating with leadership around like, hey, you can't keep doing this. But I found that the term has gotten used so much that folks are just numb to it now. Like if I go to a director or a VP or even some random manager and say like we need to pause and work on tech debt, they're like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because it can mean anything from I didn't like that code because I didn't write it to we got to rewrite the whole system to no, actually, really, what it is that we have these tests that people keep pushing past, and because they're flaky and they don't work, and we're not going to, and we need to go actually sit down and figure out what our testing strategy is, right? And so I always like to talk about tech debt in the context of something more specific that the business might care about. So it's like our release is taking longer to get out. Are we finding that every time we touch this piece of code, we have 3 customer found it first bugs? Are we finding that, we're having an increasing number of security vulnerabilities, like something a little more concrete to talk about? And then that becomes, to your point, something that's measurable constantly, whereas tech debt as a concept isn't, right? It's not measurable.
Yeah, I like how you liken that to the business. I agree that I understand tech debt, and I've watched it and I've seen it and I've tracked it. I think that you're right that it's gotten bastardized. People are desensitized to it. They're hype word and then desensitized. Hype word, desensitized. So it was a hype word a while ago, and now we're just desensitized to it. How do we balance so that we're not saying instead of focusing on features, we're going to focus on blah? How do we better tell the story? Is this through things like SRE? Is it through things where we are taking those who understand development and having them focus on other improvements to the system? How can we start to balance it? How do we justify that to the business?
I have a really good way, I think. Here's my hypothesis. Of course, the problem is that they terminate this signal as a knee-jerk. The way that you measure that we should be focusing more on improvement work than we do on feature work is, number one, more defects are leaking and it takes longer to get anything done. So there's objective metrics that we can measure around that and watch trends over time. The problem is, as soon as you say, oh no, stop, you've terminated my signal. I can't tell anymore. I have no more information to work from. I'm just working on emotion. And, I think we're supposed to be data-driven. I mean, it's technology industry. Seems obvious to me, but.
Of course it seems obvious to us. All of this seems obvious to us, but that's also why we're drinking. Because it seems obvious to us.
Because it's so painful watching people punch themselves in the face and telling us that we're wrong.
Yeah. Yep. So
to your question around SRE, though, I thought that was an interesting question. I will say that SRE as a concept is also a buzzword, hype. And so sometimes we end up in a situation where it gets redefined by lots of different people. It gets redefined by even the folks that wrote the book. And And so it is kind of this interesting idea of like, when we talk about SRE, it's like, what is SRE? And one implementation of SRE is the idea of you need a separate reporting structure in order to have someone who focuses and has expertise in this area, while you have another reporting structure, another organization in your big company who's actually going to focus on feature velocity. And that having those two opposing reporting chains can allow for that protection of time, right? The challenge I feel with that is that's basically the DevOps conversation again. Just we've shifted some work over, like we've shifted a little more work over to the ops side, and so you end up with the same moral hazard of the folks that are incentivized to release fast are going to release fast, and there's not really an incentive structure.
What
to
that's I think the reason that things like that evolve, though, that we need two different reporting structures, is so that the people responsible for saying, hey, things are kind of going south, you might want to look at this, can't be influenced and have their evals harmed because they slowed down feature delivery. Right?
No, and that is correct. It's incentives, right? We're trying to do incentives, and we're trying to create a job ladder or a role profile where the incentive is to focus on this work instead of this work. But you still, in some ways, you still need everyone to focus on the quality work. Like you can't give anyone a pass that it's not their job to think about quality, right?
Yeah. So what you should do is, on a football team, you need to make sure that the defensive side of the team reports to a completely different organization, so that they have the right incentives instead of collaborating with offense.
Wait, you mean a set of defensive coaches that are different than the offensive?
No. They have
coaches?
defensive.
Okay,
coaches. They sell the same reporting structure as offense. So, yeah. I think the whole idea of we need to have conflict to have quality is dumb.
Yeah, it is. It is. But what's interesting is how many don't understand that quality is not tested in. We say this all the time, but it's very true. You don't test in quality, you build in quality from the beginning. When you encounter it, you surge, you rally, you swarm, you take care of it together. And it is not something to be ashamed of. So, in the same way where I've got a friend and we've been talking and she's normalizing sobriety. I think we have to normalize that there are defects, normalize it, not make it a desirable thing, but normalize fixing defects, normalize it. And let's not browbeat people, right?
I have this book here that unfortunately is out of print.
Okay. The Zen of programming.
I got a copy of this book in college, and I keep collecting copies because it's out of print. And it's very thin. Right.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, and it says in here, and it's correct, that there's no such thing as a system with no defects. Right. And so instead of a defect-free system, what we should be focusing on is how well do we respond to defects, right? Because and people say, well, that's just silly. We can make a defect-free system. Really? The operating system's defect-free, the hardware's defect-free.
But there truly are areas where people want desperately for there to be no defects. And I can say this with great authority. A lot of what I do is I work with the DoD, and weapon systems, they want there to be zero defects. Is it reasonable?
Well, hang on. They fielded the M16 to Vietnam. Come on.
Hold on. I'm talking about the passion that they feel that they don't want there to be a mistake, because the mistake will be so cataclysmic. So my point on that is, at times, the desire to have no defects is founded with a passion that there be no mistakes because of the ramifications of it. So I understand where that mindset can grow from, but after scabs and scars and scabs and scars of policy and checklists and things, it has gotten in some areas to the point that it is so slow, so pathetic, that it could take me 15 to 18 months to get one small, teeny teeny
So
tiny
I
change
actually-
because of the dramatic testing that's grown around it.
So I had a conversation with a friend of mine about this, Phyllis, you know Phyllis.
Mhm.
And Phyllis and I were talking about the problem that we have. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Phyllis. It was somebody else that we're going to have a recording with in September.
Oh,
And
I know who that is.
Yeah, and we were talking about the problem we have where people try to, there are analogies you can make between physical things and software,
Mhm.
but they're not the same thing.
Absolutely not.
A physical mental model to software and make wrong decisions as leaders. You know, they can't imagine a Model T becoming a Tesla because you replaced a bolt and a panel one at a time over time.
Well,
right? So it's not possible. So we just need to replace the entire car instead of evolving it. The same with defects. They like, well, we have to make sure this thing is perfect because it won't change. No, I can change it tomorrow.
but see, I think I have to have some empathy for where the desire to get it right came from. Now, there are places where I'm helping them, helping the DoD, where they have policies in place that are hardware policies applied to software. Start date, end date, goes into warranty for a year. Then it gets picked up and moved over to a different organization within a different environment for sustainment. Keep the lights on. No, literally, and that's the process and the policy.
But it's hilariously stupid, right?
Well, but they don't. But it grew.
Wait, let me be clear. Like, I do have empathy. I'm trying to explain though that this is the root cause is that they're applying a mental model for physical objects, something that's completely mutable as long as I can touch it. If I can touch it, I can change it. If it's broken, I can fix it tomorrow, today, in minutes. Right? If I've put the processes in place to allow that to happen, instead of putting processes in place to make sure it's perfect.
I think some of it, in the world that I live in at the minute, I think some of it is because of the evolution over time. I don't think it's because they have that exact model that they can touch it. Therefore, I think that they are so risk adverse in risky situations that they've put too much emphasis on all risk avoidance instead of appropriate risk mitigation, which is a totally different thing. And Michelle, to the things that we've been talking about from an SRE perspective, from different types of automations, from changing the lens of who you're trying to talk to about it, it's mitigating the risk as opposed to trying to completely avoid. If we accept that it's going to happen, stuff's going to happen. If we accept that it happened, we can actually better get after it. Don't you think?
Educate, but go ahead, Michelle. I'm sorry.
Well, one of the things that I've always wanted to have happen is, back to the puppy analogy and punishing the puppy, is that we all know that positive reinforcement actually works better than negative reinforcement. Like it doesn't satisfy our sense of justice. It's counterintuitive. We always don't know how to do it, but it generally over time does work better. You get happy people, happy, doing the right things, the right behaviors, everything you want. And what I would love to have happen is to invert the conversation to one of positive reinforcement instead of consequences for bad actions. And so the thing I've always thought would be really awesome to do, if you could do it without any toil or bureaucracy or silliness, is to reward people for everything they found before production. So if they found it in a unit test, we celebrate. If they found it in this end-to-end integration suite, whatever, we celebrate. They found it in code review, we celebrate. Like if they found it looking over someone else's shoulder, we celebrate. And then we look at that as the thing we really want to optimize, not drive down defects, but bring up the preventative things we did that let a defect not get out.
I love that. We had a bug. We actually physically had this little gnarly looking stuffed bug thing. I think it was like a Beanie Baby kind of thing. And the goal was to get that. It was like to be the first person to find that. And so your mindset changed. It was actually, we were gamifying it. So it didn't matter if it was in your code or in somebody else's code, it kept your eye on quality. It was a hoot. And we were doing this when we were working with the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and the stuff that we were doing was really cool. And that bug was making its way cube to cube to cube. You would like be like, oh yeah, phew, look at what I just found. And it wasn't meant to be mean. And it was interesting at first, there was a defensiveness. Wait a minute, you found something in my code? Wait, what are you doing looking at my code? Over time, it probably took a good 6 weeks, and it was a fairly small team. Well, a couple of groups together. There are about 25 people who are associated to this. Took a bit for people to get used to raising the hand that I found something in Bryan's code, or raising the hand that you found something in Tracy's code. It took a little bit to get after that. There is some defensiveness that can come with it, but if you can gamify it and if you can celebrate it, I love your term, Michelle, if you can celebrate it, it changes it.
The thing that helped me grow the most was when I finally admitted that when I finally internalized that the entire reason for this agile BS is that everything we do is wrong. And
is that like original sin? Just like everything we do is wrong? Okay.
No. I mean, everything we do is defective in some way. And I was talking to Madeline, our lead UX designer, today about the fact that I fell in love with her when she got hired, and I showed her a project I'd been working on. And I'm not a front-end developer, a great designer of user experiences, but I do some front-end work. And we'd been working as a team on something for a government program. And I showed it to her, and I fell in love with her when she gave me an honest review of and suggestions for how to make it better, right? And if developers, product owners, everybody could just internalize, I need someone to tell me what's wrong, and be emotionally invested in the outcomes instead of emotionally invested in the work they've done. I am not emotionally invested in any work I've done. I'm emotionally invested in the work I'm doing is helping somebody, and what those outcomes are.
Mindset shift. It's a mindset shift, and we teach it into our children from an early age. It's about perfection. You want to straight A's, A pluses, B's don't count, C's are worse. So we have trained this in. It's actually hard for us to train that out, but I 1000% agree with you, Bryan, that it's a mindset shift that we have to get after. We are getting later on the East Coast. Michelle, if there was something that the audience, we get developers, we get technical leads, we get C-suites listening to our funky little doodad here. If there's something for them to take away, some guidance from you, what would it be?
Oh gosh. Put me on the spot here. Because I was like, it's got to be pithy. It's got to be pithy.
No, it doesn't have to be pithy. It can be. It can just meander and wander, and then we can edit it out.
I'm not a big fan of managing through metrics. I actually get quite frustrated in organizations that are really overly fixated on managing through metrics. But if you're going to have to do it, like if you had to do it, you felt like you could not get control of your situation unless you had some number you could stare at. I do think time to production. So however you're going to measure that your lead time, whatever, time to production. And then the number, like the escapes, the number of things defects that make it out into production. Yeah. And that would be the thing I would focus on more than like, don't count outages. Please don't count rollbacks. Please don't do all these silly things. Don't count minutes of an outage. Just like focus on those two things.
I like that. So lead time and escapes. And between those two, that's a pretty telling story, and it should actually drive some really good behaviors. It really should.
But if you come at it with the attitude of we're trying to identify where in the system something's broken, instead of we're trying to judge or punish people.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's diagnostic, not about punishment. Yeah.
You wouldn't know from Bryan's tone that he really is like invested in humans. You would think that he like hates all people just from his snarl.
I emulate empathy, but I've been practicing for a while.
You have been, and you've told me that before. So Bryan, I will ask you the same question on this topic. Is there something that you want our listeners to take away?
Oh, sure. If you can't afford to send all of your developers on a paid vacation for holiday freeze, maybe look at why you have a 3-month holiday freeze and start trying to address those problems so that you can compete with Amazon, Walmart.
Wait, Amazon and Walmart, or Amazon,
No,
comma, Walmart? Oh, am I gonna have to like censor anything out? Just
No.
checking.
I'm
I'm
not under
joking.
NDA.
I'm joking.
It's common knowledge.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
I'm perfectly happy to call them out for bad behavior.
Oh.
Like, it's hurting my friends.
Oh my goodness. Well, it has been a long day and has been a very wonderful conversation. I'm not going to summarize because y'all have heard my opinion throughout this entire thing. Care about people, care about one another. If we focus on humans, all of these other things tend to fall into place. To all of our listeners, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have topics, there's somebody that you want to bring on to talk with us, if you want to come on and talk with us, put it in the comments, hit us up on LinkedIn, bump into Bryan when you're walking down the city street. It'll happen and you'll show up here. That's it for tonight. And thank you for joining us for On the Road to DevOps.